The exploration of the essential mystery.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think I see a lot of I see great books and great angling is pretty allied, pretty close. Where they're kind of after this essential mystery.
Well, hi, everyone. Tim Schultz here. Hey, thank you for listening to the Reading the Water podcast. I'm excited to tell you we have Hal Herring on this episode. Now, Hal's a writer whose work has appeared in publications ranging from Field and Stream to The Economist. He's also the host of the terrific Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast and Blast. Now, Hal and I are going to talk about the importance of public lands, the flow of Montana's rivers, his journey in writing, and many other things, including the subtle art of trotlines. You know, Hal's a fascinating guy. I'm really looking forward to this, so let's get him on this show. Well, hi, Hal. How you doing today?
Doing good, Tim. Glad to be here, man.
All right. I'm so happy that you're here. Hey, let's jump in. I want to talk about something I read on your website. When was the last time you caught a fish on a trot line?
Well, okay, so the last time I made a makeshift trot line for my kids about probably 15 years ago on the Missouri River here in Montana. But the last time I actually ran trot lines was in college, actually in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. A buddy of mine came back from commercial fishing. We'd worked in the Gulf. And he built this new age trot line based on our long line experience in the Gulf.
Yeah.
And we finally quit doing it. We were catching a lot of catfish. We had like a teardrop anchor and these what we called jap hooks at the time, but they're circle hooks.
Sure.
And a circle hook is an amazing development. You know, they didn't have those when I was a little kid building trot lines on the Tennessee River. And a circle hook made all the difference in the world. We let a lot of those fish go. That was in the Black Warrior River. But he took it to a new level, I tell you. The trot lines of my youth were primitive organisms compared to this thing that my buddy built in college.
Yeah. They're so exciting, right? You just don't know what's there.
You're soaking. It's like you're letting it soak.
Yeah.
And it's like you're solving all the mysteries that you've been wondering about. What's down there?
Yeah.
I tell you, in high school, I got more addicted to limb lines. And that's still something that if I were in the South, that's still something I would be doing. And I tell you, a limb line with a live bait in a shoal water for flatheads is really one of the most. I've never gotten over the power and excitement of that.
Yeah.
And it's different because on the trot line you're mostly catching blues or channels, catfish.
Yeah.
But on a limb line you're specifically targeting flatheads, which are much more predatory.
Yeah.
And they go at night. It's the most mysterious. Like, that's what we're talking as fishermen. This is what we spend our time thinking about. At night they come out of whatever deep holes they live in, these big fish, and they hunt in the shallows.
Yeah.
And so the limb line was my thing in high school.
Right. So let's see, a guy grows up with trot lines and limb lines. How the heck do you mix that with this great love of literature that you have?
Well, I think they're the same. I think it's the exploration of the essential mystery.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I see I see great books and great angling is pretty allied, pretty close. Where they're kind of after this essential mystery.
Yeah. Your parents, did they fish? Did they read? It all came from the house?
Well, the reading all came from the house for sure. Everybody had a book, and there was a huge library that you could go. My father had this huge library, my mother too, but the books were always there.
Yeah.
And my father was so busy. We had 5 kids, and he was putting a lot of them through college. So I didn't realize until I was probably 10 or 11 that he had fished quite a bit as a kid, and he really did like to fish or love to fish. I don't know, but he was a lawyer,
Uh-huh.
and he just worked uh, all the time, and it was probably his recreation, and his passion was to argue cases in the court, But I was at a place outside of Birmingham, Alabama one time, Echo Lake. I was about 10,
Uh-huh.
and he picked up this eagle claw fly rod that one of my uncles, probably great uncle, had there in the boathouse. And he handled that thing like a pro. And he put this popper out against a weed line and caught it was probably like a 4-pounder. I mean, it seemed really big to me.
Yeah, yeah.
And I realized that he had done this a lot. Like that was a part of his life that I missed, right? Like I came in when he was in the working stage of his life.
Yeah.
And so it was he had stories of fishing the Chattahoochee in Alabama.
Uh-huh.
And they always had this like terrible motor that they eventually lost. It fell off the boat, but the motor would usually not work, so they would only motor upstream, so they would be sure to get home when the motor conked out.
Yeah.
So it was there. It just
Yeah.
and I would say they were enablers for me as a fisherman and a hunter.
Uh-huh.
Christmas I got like an eagle claw with an automatic reel.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
And so I had access to good fishing stuff.
What about so much of your life, the conservation and the environment, and we're going to talk a lot about that. Did that happen? Can you remember a time that you didn't care deeply about conservation of the environment, or is there a moment that it happened that
There was never a moment when I didn't.
Uh-huh.
But you and I are probably close to the same age, and
Yeah.
where I grew up at first, and when I was about 11, we moved way out in the country, which was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
But the human expansion there, like around Huntsville, Alabama,
Uh-huh.
was such an obvious part of our lives. Like there was a creek there, Aldridge Creek, that ran pretty close to elementary school. You could see it. You could long for it.
Yeah, right,
From the
right.
windows of the school when you were being forced to do elementary math. And they just channelized Aldridge Creek and put concrete in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember feeling that as an absolute personal affront. And I mean, I would have been like 8, 7, 6.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, who would do this? Like, what kind of a species would take a living creek where little kids played and hit each other? And I got hit in the head with a rock there by this kid one time. We were feral children on Aldridge Creek.
Right.
And turn it into a concrete gully. And so I mean, I'm telling you this. It's funny. I'm telling you this story right now. It's like it happened this morning.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I have never. It always freaked me out, like when they take a dozer and take out a hedgerow.
Yeah.
Where and again, it is who raises you. My mother had been collecting possum haul there for like ornamental, like Thanksgiving decoration or whatever. And look, and she showed me this leather vine. It's like a clematis.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I must have been really little. I mean, and then like we came back like a year later, and that thing was dozed flat. And this was before they started spraying everything.
Mm-hmm.
The county instead of like using crews and dozers, they just sprayed everything. Come the 80s and the 90s,
Right.
But I was a grown man in the 80s, but yeah, it's early days. I just saw it. I still see it as something you don't have to do it like that.
Right, right.
I mean,
Yeah.
you just don't. And they had to they had to build a greenway down below Aldrich Creek for the floodplain because they wrecked the creek so badly.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a bad idea from the beginning, despite the fact that it was anti-life and anti-children's freedom and anti-nature or whatever. It was a terrible idea.
Right.
Yeah.
The uh so let's get you to Montana. What takes the kid from Alabama to Montana?
Well, so when I was still in college in Tuscaloosa, we started a company, a partner of mine, still one of my main fishing buddy in the world. We started a company planting trees for the paper companies on
Uh-huh.
contract. And we had done that for a while and liked it a lot. Like you live outside, work real hard, and you get more money than you would if you worked at the lumber yard.
Yeah.
And so we had a paper company contract for planting pine trees in Alabama. And I went to Montana to attend the Yellow Bay Writers Workshop in 1988. It was Tom McGuane was there, Annick Smith was there, Bill Kittredge came in, these iconic writers,
Right.
And on that train was a man, wild looking guy going to Whitefish, and he was a tree planter. And we got to talking, and I ended up getting off the train in Whitefish, and we went and had some beers at the Palace Bar. And he just said, if you're a tree planter and you're in the South, you need to be here. This is where the tree planting, this is the real thing.
Uh-huh.
And I started making plans to come do that. And so the year after that, my wife, she was my girlfriend then, we moved up to Montana to pursue a tree planting dream.
Okay.
Which didn't work out. I got fired off the first crew I got on. I didn't have any idea how to plant trees in the Rocky Mountains.
How long did it take? How long before they fired you?
About an hour and a half. Yeah.
Oh, you gotta be kidding.
Yeah. And I did eventually, though. I found work. It was a strange time. I don't know whether for other folks, but I mean, we just found work immediately. It was like people were looking. I just put my name up at the ag co-op, and I was driving tractor on a hay crew by like dark.
Yeah.
And so I eventually did tree plant in the Rocky Mountains, and I did a lot of it.
Yeah.
But my first foray into it was kind of like going from cane pole fishing to spearing tuna.
Yeah.
It was a whole different world.
Yeah, yeah. Well, okay. So tree planter, tractor, rider. When did you decide you want to be a writer?
Well, I'd always been a reader.
Yeah.
And wherever I went, I had box of books in the truck or whatever. So I published some fiction in my late 20s. I was working on a ranch there where you didn't get paid very much, but you had about 3 months where there was nothing happening, but you had a house provided.
Uh-huh.
And my wife and I had taken that job, and so I wrote a lot those winters.
Yeah.
And I published short fiction. I published some essays. I won a short story contest. It was judged by Peter Matthieson, who was one of my heroes.
Yeah.
And but it took me so long to finish anything that I didn't see it as a way of making a dollar.
Uh-huh.
Until I took a master's in creative writing when I was 30.
Uh-huh.
And that was kind of like I remember I traded there's a lot of this story. I traded a 20 gauge A5 shotgun for an Apple II computer. And I drove up. The first time I ever came to the place where I live, I raised my family here for the last 25 years. But first time I ever came here, I met a guy who had an Apple II computer and wanted an A5 20 gauge for his wife. And that was my like declaration of seriousness, you know. And I typed my first Field and Stream story on that, and most everything else. It was, but that was probably, I was in my late 20s. I was kind of a late starter on actually trying to make $1.
Yeah.
Like I sold a story to High Country News and Field and Stream, and some other folks all at the same time. And at that time, I was thinning timber on contract, subcontract. And I had a kind of a disaster where I thinned timber by myself on a contract that lasted for like, I don't know, 2.5 months. And I got back to town and I hunted up the primary contractor who was living in outside Missoula. And he had defaulted on all those contracts like months before.
Yeah.
And so there was no money. And that was a real big problem. Yeah, as you might imagine.
Yeah, right.
And through a really great friend of mine who was an editor at Bugle Magazine, we met the right Forest Service folks, and I got most of my money. It was like but it showed the handwriting was on the wall that this is not what you can do. You're going to be doing. And I had sold a couple of stories, and I thought, well, anything's better than thinning timber for free.
Right, right.
You know, thinning timber is not a bad job. I actually loved it. But thinning timber for free is not going to
It's not a job.
Not a job. Yeah, right. And sometimes I felt that way about writing too. Like later.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that's kind of the genesis of it.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I mean, you've written certainly about conservation and the environment, and how important is writing for these causes? Can writers make a difference?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I don't have so on a bad day, I would probably say I don't know. But on a good day, I have received correspondence all my life about the work that I did.
Yeah. And
so somewhere out there, and I don't like to use negative words like the void, right? I think that using negative language for a writer is really, you know better.
Okay.
So there is no void, but you put the work out there and the rock is thrown, the splash happens, the ripples go somewhere.
Yeah.
And my take on that always, when I actually just embrace being a journalist, which I find a wonderful calling. I just said, hey man, y'all are out there roofing, you're out there figuring out the car payment, you're taking the kids to school. I'm out here learning about something that you're interested in because it affects your life, your clean water, your duck hunting, your kids a chance to be healthy and strong. And you don't have time to do this. No way, but you're interested in it. And I'll do it for a paycheck. And that'll be my role.
Yeah.
And what you do with that information, I don't have any effect over. I only it's the process that I'm in charge of. And what happens is to it. What you do with it is I always think of William Wilberforce addressing the British Parliament. And he was arguing for the Anti-Slavery Act that was going to fund the Navy to stop slavery on the east coast of Africa. And he compiled these huge reports about the horrors of the slave trade in Africa. And he just said, gentlemen, you may say you don't care. You may say you won't fund this. You may say this doesn't make a difference to you. But after today, you will never be able to say you did not know.
Right.
And so that's been my kind of touchstone.
Yeah, yeah. What on that? So in addition to informing people, make them smarter. I always look at things that way. I think it's part of the academic in me, whether it's a podcast, a speech I'm going to give, or a story I'm going to write. How are people going to be different when they finish than they were when they started? Right. If you're not
Right.
going to change something, what's the point? Right.
Right.
And a lot of times it's about changing minds. I mean, sometimes, and you must think about that, right? In addition, just to give them the information, like, how do you think about it? Because some people are just dug in, and you got to help them, get them off that center so they see things differently.
Yeah. So I don't have that.
Yeah.
I'm not out there to change anybody's mind ever.
Uh-huh.
What I'm out there to do is what William Wilberforce said. It's like, especially like if you have children or you're a fisherman or a hunter or you love birds,
Uh-huh.
there's certain things that affect that passion. Right. And I can tell you that if you continue to take out all the cover between my house and Chester, Montana, and plant wheat and then fallow half of it so that there's no living organisms on the ground,
right,
you're not going to have a lot of birds to watch. And if you continue to do what we did for decades in the South with allowing the creeks to silt up because you cut down all the trees and dozed off all the cover, you're not going to have a lot of fish to catch.
Right.
If you continue to take all the water out of the streams in Montana and spray it on alfalfa, and you go like, holy smokes, all the fish are dead. I wonder what happened. Then you're not going to have fly fishing and the beauty of watching a trout rise on the edge of an eddy.
Right.
You're not going to have that. So I don't care if you love agriculture and you love alfalfa and you love exporting things and you believe that money is the greatest thing on earth and that people don't have any responsibility. But if you like to fish, you need to know that there has to be water in the river.
Uh-huh.
and if you care about anything, and the truth is, again, I go back to my analogy. You run a roofing company. You don't have time to read the stream monitors.
Right.
You run a repair bay for Toyota. Man, that's a hard job. And maybe you love to elk hunt, but you don't have time to explore the migration corridors that are bringing those elk to winter range and what's happening to that winter range. That's my job.
Uh-huh.
Now, I don't care if you change your mind. You can say you don't care, but you won't say that you didn't know.
Excellent. Yeah.
You have to be divorced from outcome in this life.
Uh-huh.
Is what I've learned.
Yeah.
You do your work for the work's sake. And once you've done that, you can, my parents would say, could you take what you did before Jesus today? And most time I fall short on that, right? But like some days when you've done your work.
Yeah.
And they don't say, did you win?
Uh-huh.
Did you crush the opponent? And they go, no, but I shod the horses that the cavalry's going to use.
Yeah. That's it. Yeah. It's interesting in education. I teach the kids and some of them want to learn about electrical engineering, some don't. But yeah, I guess that's exactly the way I look at it without maybe having articulated that way. Is like, my job is to give them the opportunity to know. What they want to do with it, that's up to them. How about are there any works that you're particularly proud of that stand out when you look back?
You know what? I don't think so. There's some that certainly resonated with large numbers of people, and I get a lot of correspondence about them.
Mm-hmm.
And so there is an element of ego pride there.
Yeah.
but a lot of it was just putting the words on paper, and waiting for the writing to make sense to me and stuff. I wished I had more. I wrote a book on firearms once. I was really proud of that for a while.
Uh-huh.
That I had started. I've always had a hard time starting and finishing.
Yeah.
Anything. I don't know if it's ADHD. I don't know what you'd call it or whatever. But I've always had a hard time with that. And I keep that Stephen Pressfield book, The War of Art.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I give copies,
right.
Yeah, I give copies away to people, but I keep a copy.
Uh-huh.
And I have to revisit that periodically. So I was proud that my editor and them pushed me to finish the famous firearms book.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm working on a book now that I'm 3 years into, and I am going to finish it.
Okay.
But it's mostly what I'm proud of is just having done the work. I got here, and at one point, sometimes I have to Google myself up to make sure that I know that I've finished stuff before.
Yeah, that's right. Public lands. I want to talk about public lands, but I was looking at your website and I saw a little story that I hope you would be happy to talk about. You referenced serving on a jury on a homicide involving private and public lands.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, so it was a bizarre thing, because I live in a community of less than about 300 people.
Uh-huh.
And so this homicide everybody knew about it. It was a man. It's been all on Dateline and stuff now, so I can talk about it. The jury and I we all made a vow not to go into what we discussed over a couple of really hard days of deliberation. And so I wrote a piece about the case and the legal aspects of it. And people said, well, boy, there's a lot there you didn't tell, huh? And the truth is I couldn't.
Right.
Because we discussed, we made a vow that not to talk about it. But the legal aspects I could talk about. And a man named Tim Newman was determined to keep his access to the national forest south of my place. And another guy had bought 600 acres in there and was determined that nobody was going to use that access across his property anymore. And so it was so interesting that this went on and on. And in essence, it was two people who had too much time on their hands,
uh-huh.
That should have been doing something productive.
Uh-huh.
But in the end, Joe Campbell shot Tim Newman and killed him. And these people knew each other very well too. And so the case was over. Was it what kind of homicide was it? And it ended up there was a hung jury on the deliberate homicide because Tim Newman had a pistol with him. And he had a pair of bolt cutters cutting locks off the thing. So it was on Joe Campbell's property.
Uh-huh.
And so they ended up going kind of settling for negligent homicide, which means neither guy had to be there.
Uh-huh.
You didn't have to kill the guy, and that's what it was. And that was the eventual verdict. But it was about public lands access. And I told my wife, I said, well, everybody knows everybody in this community. I'll be thrown, during voir dire jury selection, I'll be thrown out like immediately. But it turned out that I was one of the few people that didn't actually have a relationship with either of these people. And had not been on like the first call when the volunteer ambulance went down and stuff. I didn't have a connection.
Okay.
And so I was put on. I was on that jury. It was lasted for about almost a month. And it was a incredible experience in every way, and a immersion in public lands access issues.
Yeah,
it was like, I felt incredibly lucky and grateful at the end
Uh-huh.
because it fitted right with like my public lands reporting and all the things that I needed to know.
Sure. You know,
Uh,
that caught my attention. I live in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, which is a pretty remote, wild place, and Michigan's stream access laws are similar to Montana's. I think very similar.
yep, yep,
But there's a lot of landowners that don't agree with those laws,
you bet.
and there are sections of rivers. I think this fellow finally died, but I would not go through because uh, I'd never had it happen, but other people had him come out and fire shots above their head when they're on the
Right,
river and tell them you don't belong here. And I don't want to get shot for this. So
right, for sure. And that case, it made me a lot more careful with angry people.
yeah.
Like uh, as a kid, I remember people like brandishing weapons and saying, "You got to get off my property" and stuff,
Uh-huh.
And I don't think we were totally impressed by that. But now I'm more impressed.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, yeah, it's interesting. You learn a lot. That guy who's doing that on those rivers is in imminent danger of being put in jail,
Right. Yeah.
as he should,
Right.
for endangerment and brandishing.
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
and one of the failures in this case here was it should have been addressed like nobody had to shoot anybody.
Hmm.
It didn't. It was kind of absurd.
Yeah.
One could have granted it, but there were some easement issues there that just worked against a peaceful solution.
Yeah. Hey, what? You're probably familiar with this. I know a little bit about it. I think, pretty high profile case in Montana on the Ruby River a few years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah. And did that? How did that get resolved, or is it resolved?
it's not really resolved except on the Montana Stream Access Law stood firm
Uh-huh.
against the challenges. But those kind of challenges are never going to. The thing about conservation, public access, public lands is like there is no time where the battle is won. Like the river, the person is still, and I was going to say a very wealthy person in this case, right?
Yeah. Right.
But it doesn't have to be that. Like poor folks can be jealous of their of their piece of river too.
Uh-huh.
But that case stood firm. The stream access law stood firm, and it has been challenged from the very beginning in the 80s when we passed it.
Uh-huh.
And it has an incredible history out, and I've written quite a bit about this, but the stream access law in Montana has an incredible history. It was very unlikely to get such a so-called, I'm doing air quotes, liberal access law.
Right.
I don't think it's liberal at all. I think it's absolutely conservative that the people should have access to their water.
Right.
But that case stood. James Kennedy brought that case against the state, challenging the stream access law, and he lost. But they were doing stuff like they would build an extra fence around the public right of way where the bridge crossed the river.
Yeah.
The original stream access law was helped a lot by a guy who lived east of me. He's passed away now, but he drove his truck over a lady's raft.
Really?
Yeah, who was trying to float the Dearborn River through his property. And that was a little much. That was one of those extreme cases that helps. People are going, "Oh, that's a little much, pal."
Yeah, right.
Maybe we should settle. Maybe we should find a way to settle this through the institutions of the United States of America.
Yeah.
Rather than you driving your truck over a lady's raft and her fishing stuff. And honestly, I mean, that's the way. Also, that whole thing south of me, that killing was solved when the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation purchased some land that provided access to the national forest all the way down that.
Oh,
Like it was not even, and the homicide case was not totally the impetus for that, but it would have made it unnecessary.
right, right.
You know, a simple public-private partnership creating access to the national forest in that area.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can just put the guns back in the truck.
Yeah, yeah.
Nobody has to do this, you know. It was a great lesson for me, you know.
Yeah.
That
Hey, I'm gonna categorize people into three categories. You tell me if we need some more. But then, so there's the people that own on this public access. There's people who
yeah,
own property and they don't want people on it, and so they're blocking access. There's people who want the access, who say that's
right.
my river, that's all of our river, that's our mountains, that's our forest. And then there's people that maybe live in New York City and it just look at it as, this doesn't affect me. Maybe you can come up with another category, but is that a good way to look at it? And are we losing the people that look at it as not an issue to them?
I don't think so. It's not an issue to them until it comes up.
Uh-huh.
One of the things that I would say you could lose those folks to is the lowering of their expectations.
Mm-hmm.
And in the United States of America, I believe we should have a very high expectation of our own freedoms and our quality of life. And that expectation of access to the river or the stream
Uh-huh.
is solely based on our ability to take responsibility for our actions on that access.
Uh-huh.
Like you don't get freedom if you're going to chunk the Funyuns bag and the baby diaper in the guy's yard.
Right.
I mean
Yeah.
the failure of access. I remember going to like Geter Falls, I think in Tennessee. It's one of my favorite places. That that southern Tennessee, Sewanee, Tennessee, Monteagle.
Sure.
Southern Cumberland's like just some of the greatest country in the world. Bizarre. It's like all the plants there are below the ice line, so you have like the diversity of forest and just like hiking into Greeter Falls, and there's just like baby diapers and beer cans, and this was like the beginning of like a methamphetamine stuff,
Uh-huh.
and there were syringes. And I was like, this is bad.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
This is awful, and I was so the access that we ask for from private landowners is dependent upon the actions and our ability to take responsibility for ourselves. Now, the action and the access that is codified in law, like with Montana Stream Access Law,
Right.
which I revere this system that we have. But it also is dependent on everybody trying to do the right thing most of the time.
Yeah. What I have a friend who he came to the U.S. from Poland. He's a professor, and a couple of years ago he started exploring the South, and he went down to Georgia and was looking for places maybe he could retire, and he wanted to trout fish, and he said he was having a lot of trouble. Fishing wasn't that great, and he parked at some bridge, got in the river, started going upstream or downstream, and he started catching huge rainbow trout, enormous. And he thought, what the heck is this? And so he kept a couple of the smaller ones. And then he got out and he started walking back, and this pickup truck came roaring across the field toward him and tore into him, called the authorities. You know what had happened. He had stumbled down, he missed the sign, and evidently it was covered up by some trees. And so he went into this guy's property, and it was a fit. But that idea that some states, it's just so different, right? So
Yep.
what do you think are some of the best states for public access, stream access, and what are some of the worst right now?
Well, so I mean, the battle is always on. New Mexico has a lot of problems.
Uh-huh.
And part of that goes back to it's how old New Mexico is, and the different system of laws. In the same way, Texas, but Texas has less problems with public access than some other states, even though it's the Texas Republic, right? The home of private lands and everything. Texas is a unique part of the world, and it's full of contradictions and wonders, But I think they fight more of it in New Mexico and Utah, and Utah is always in play. Montana is in my opinion the best, and I'm saying best for public access.
Yeah.
And a serious private property rights person would say, well, you're saying that's the worst for private property rights. Well, I don't think so. I think we've struck a balance here. But like in yoga, they say balance is never fixed. Right. When you're standing on one leg or whatever, balance is never fixed. Especially in this country, our country is so filled with contradictions and change and stuff. It's never fixed. I believe that Montana has struck the best balance in America, between the right of the public to access our waters and the right of private landowners to their privacy and use of their property. And that's really a delicate balance to strike. And one of the judges in one of the early stream access challenges here, one of the judges read it was a civil thing, right? Not criminal. He said that the truth is the predicted vandal hordes have failed to show up. And that was what the people who opposed the stream access law had said. Well, they're going to wreck my property. They're going to shoot ducks in front of my house. They're going to camp on the islands and leave beer cans. And that has happened, I'm sure. But for the most part, it has not. The predicted vandal hordes have failed to show up.
That's great. Hey, I'm gonna jump us into something, and we'll try to shed some light. I know we're talking earlier. You've got some experience on this topic. There's been a bit of a bomb on the internet over this issue of native trout, but you have some experience on that. I'd like you to talk about it.
Sure. So, many years ago, I don't know how many, I think 10 years ago, maybe, Kurt Dieter at Trout Magazine had asked me to take on a story about the protection and restoration of native trout species across the West, specifically West Slope cutthroat, which is a species that I'm pretty dear to my heart. I mean, I lived in the Bitterroots. I live around the Bob Marshall Wilderness. And I took this on. It was a personal kind of journey because I, at the time, was very suspicious of, I believe in science, but I was very suspicious of human beings' over-management of things. And that rhodonone, which is a kind of fish-specific, aquatic organism-specific poison, rhodonone could creek out of all species so that you could replace native cutthroats and give them a bastion, a holdout area,
Yeah.
I thought maybe, emphasis on maybe, that was a bridge too far in hubris, in assuming the role of God, And so this story took me forever. Because it was a personal evolution. I was like very suspicious of why you would kill all of this stuff in order to like destroy the village in order to save it. They said in Vietnam. And everybody made fun of that, right? That was crazy. You napalm, you kill all the people, you napalm the place, and you go, well, we saved it from the communists.
Right.
So I had that analogy in my mind. So by the time I finished this story, however, I came to occupy what I hope is a kind of middle path. And it's that these species are inherently, Aldo Leopold said, the first rule of intelligent tinkering is that you keep all the parts. And and I hope that this is proved true. I'm not a fisheries biologist, but as I understood it, the Gila trout were some of the first species to recover from those huge wildfires in the headwaters of the Gila. Mm-hmm. And my layman's interpretation of that is that these fish have been around since the Ice Age. They've co-evolved with landscape and climate, mm-hmm. and what people who only live 70 years, right, 80 years, we have no idea what's going on. Our window of understanding is microscopic in the scale of the earth. Uh-huh. But what we call like a catastrophic wildfire, well, these fish were some of the best adapted to weather this because they've been weathering it for thousands and thousands and thousands of years.
Right.
So that makes them inherently incredibly valuable. That DNA mm-hmm. is irreplaceably valuable. So the same is true, wet slope cutthroat, Arctic grayling, all of these species that are found in these headwater streams now. Mm-hmm. So one of the things is like in Yellowstone National Park, and I can't remember the name of the creek, but it has a natural barrier of big waterfalls. And above those falls, they've restored grayling and cutthroat. Mm-hmm. There's places on private land, Ted Turner's place, where they decided to rhododendron the creek and restore native cutthroat from that place in a very meticulous scientific way. Mm-hmm. And that is certainly his right to do. And I think that we'll be glad he did that in the long mm-hmm. run. Mm-hmm. Now, I think that we should recognize our tendency toward hubris in other places, and we should conflict. We should argue over, have coffee over, discuss, litigate, whatever it takes, over like restoring a single species in places that people really enjoy catching browns, rainbows, smallmouth bass, whatever. Mm-hmm. I think we should argue heartily over that, mm-hmm. using science and using people's understanding of the ecosystems and their resilience in the future. Mm-hmm. But we can have our cake on this and eat it too. Mm-hmm. And as much of the cake as we can have in a world that's, kind of yawning and seizing up with 8 billion, 9 billion people going on that all need something. Mm-hmm. They all need water. They all need heat. They all need something. So we've got some difficult rapids to navigate here. Uh-huh. But I don't doubt for a minute that we can navigate them and hold on to those native species and our diverse fisheries too.
Yeah. Hey, you hear the discussion of native fish a lot. As a hunter, native birds, native versus invasive birds, mammal, is that much of an issue in hunting as it gets discussed in fishing?
Well,
or is there an issue?
Not as much, because my favorite thing to hunt on the prairie is sharptails. Uh-huh. And but that's because I have an emotional connection to native species.
Yeah.
And I just love them. I find them to be the kind of the apex of all game birds. Uh-huh. But that was also taught to me by Jim Range, who founded the Teddy Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And like I absorbed this lore. Uh-huh. But that said, like sharptails in my part of the country are kind of low. I'm not shooting them now. And there's nothing I'd rather do than take a dog and chase a December big old rooster pheasant, which is emphatically not native.
Yeah, yeah.
And then one of my other favorites is hunting Huns, Hungarian partridge. And they're Hungarian. Right. and these guys like Hungarian partridge and chucker partridge, they love cheatgrass, and that's our major invasive. Uh-huh. And so they're actually doing pretty good, Yeah. So to answer your question, it's not as big a deal in hunting. People love to hunt pheasants.
Yeah.
But that's, and I don't want to be self-righteous or kind of like feeling groovy or whatever, but like, it's not quite the same as talking about a species like a Gila trout, West Slope cutthroat, that has been on the earth for so many thousands of years, and that a human being, might have the chance to say, let's keep that part of the machine. Let's keep that part of the fabric, and be able to do that. It's not quite the same. I think we're going to have sharptails too. We're going to have to change the farm bill, and we're going to have to give landowners more incentive for holding on to cover and native plants. But we can do that. That's a thing we can do. And so I don't think it's as emphatically important as this discussion over the native species in fish.
Right. Well, and I don't want to litigate Chris Hunt's story. I think in my impression, he wasn't making a case against native fish by any means. I think.
I mean, one of the things, my comment on there amongst the thousands, was who could have been better to choose than Chris Hunt for this topic, because he knows more about it than anybody else, and he is a passionate fisherman of both native species and so-called introduced species like the brown.
Yeah. And I think
the guy is he is the guy to have written that story. If I were to go through all the people I know, I would have, and I were the editor, I would have chosen Chris.
Yeah. And I might be getting it wrong, but if I had to paraphrase it, so I think the big story he wanted to tell is that if we lose our rivers, it's just not going to matter, right? That we've got to keep the focus on, we need a place for all of these trout to live. Do what we can for the natives and keep doing it, but don't take your eye off the bigger picture, because if it's, and that's a little bit of a segue. I really want to talk to you about minimum flows in Montana. I've been in Montana a couple of times, had wonderful times there. It's done so much for me. But I know there's problems, and at the highest level, I thought, what a wonderful state. Look how well they've taken care of these rivers. They have all these wild fish, and there's a lot of access. But then as I kind of peel the layers of the onion, I'm learning all is not well. And
that's right.
And so
yeah. I would go again with Chris's contention that if we don't get to the basis of keeping watersheds intact and having water in the rivers, then that tail is wagging, the tail of native species versus introduced is wagging that dog against the wall, right? It's beating him to death.
Yeah.
And we can do both, but go ahead.
Yeah. Give me a little of the history of minimum flows in Montana. What's the story, and maybe even how do they define it? And when was there must have been a time when ranchers just took what they wanted and didn't care, right?
Yeah.
Give us
a little. We did that all over the West.
Yeah.
We did that all over the West. I mean, even the snake would go dry.
Yeah.
Like down around Glenn's Ferry, Idaho. And in Montana, they would go dry for sure. But it's a very complicated story that we can't get too deep into. Okay. But there's elements of law in the Montana Constitution, which was rewritten in the 70s, which is often seen as one of the best constitutions in America. And I agree with that. But there were concessions made in that Constitution that kind of institutionalized practices that are in stream flow, particularly, that are making it difficult to negotiate and fix it. So there's that, which would take a whole podcast on its own, which somebody else should be doing. Like not me.
Yeah.
But what happened was we don't have water rights are attached to property. And so that's not true in every state. And it makes it much more difficult to argue with the landowner that they should leave more water in the river. because that it's a property right that's attached to the value of your property as well.
Uh-huh.
And so that's an essential that people can kind of dig into here. That's one of the challenges.
Yeah.
But Trout Unlimited has done a lot of huge work working with landowners to keep more water in like the Big Hole
Uh-huh.
during the grayling years, especially because they were worried about federal endangered species action on behalf of the grayling.
Yeah.
So that was all well and good, and it is a model for the future. However, it hasn't worked well enough, and we don't have a legal minimum in-stream flow requirement, and that's a problem because there's carrots, but there's no stick.
So there's nothing that prevents the river to go dry downstream.
Not really, because all of us have a right to our number of our amount of water, and the cumulative effect is not taken into account in the way it should. And it's so complicated because people thought that advances in irrigation, like center pivots, would use less water, and then you would have more in the river. You could line ditches with impermeable plastic or bentonite and save more water, right? But it turns out that a lot of that water is going back into river streams, created wetlands, aquifers, all that, the leakage. So it's really hard to solve this problem, and yet solve it we must. And I would, before I speak too much on it, because there are people working on this who've done nothing but this for 40 years. And they're going to have to draw on their knowledge and pass it on to the next generation. And we're going to need to solve this, though, very soon. And one of the things that I just blows my mind, and I've talked with lots of people about this, was people go like, I think your water's too warm. I think it must be climate change that's killing the fish. Or there's a disease in the Yellowstone and a fish kill from climate change. I was like, dude, there ain't a tributary in this valley reaching the main river. You don't think that might be the essential problem? I was just like, I was like, I couldn't believe that we were moving towards these abstractions because the essential problem that was in front of our face was too intractable. And I was like, this may be a human thing, where there's no mammoths left, so we're going to have to make the trek across the ice or whatever,
Yeah.
But like, it seemed also human to me that people would say there's a disease in the Yellowstone. And I was like, disease strikes people, trees, animals, everybody when you're stressed.
Right.
If you're starving in the prison camp in the Philippines, lo and behold, there's more tropical diseases running through the inmates.
Right.
It's like we have to deal, as Chris Hunt was indicating, with the problem that is in front of us now. And that is not enough water is reaching the rivers of Montana. I'm
going to make you Kevin Costner. You're the new governor of Montana. What would you do? I'll make you king of Montana. Do we? Are there answers?
There's answers, but they don't rely on royal or emperor power. The answers to all of environmental problems are a basic understanding of what's there and how wonderful and incredible it is. And then leaning to people with and trying to build a constituency one of the things we failed at environmentally in the United States since the 1970s. The 1970s was all the passage of the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Wilderness Act of 1964. There was this period of time, Toxic Substances Control Act. That was after the Velsicol Chemical Company had dumped like so much stuff in the into the Mississippi tributary. And people were going, "Holy smokes, we got to fix this!" Right? So you have this incredible environmental decade, which Doug Brinkley has written about in a book called The Silent Spring Revolution. Mm-hmm. And we have been living as the beneficiaries on that decade, or I would say almost 20 years, for now 50 years. Uh-huh. And many of us have forgotten why you can't drink the water in Mexico City, even though in some of the nicest neighborhoods in the world, you still got to take a shower with your mouth closed. Uh-huh. And why the United States chose to be different. And they go like, well, that's federal overreach. Well, and while they're drinking water out of their own tap.
Right.
And we have lost this concept. We have been ruled by federal fiat to fix all this stuff. Superfund. I mean, who do you think pays for Superfund? Who do you think, what do you think the EPA does? What do you think the Food and Drug Administration does, right? And are they perfect? Hell no. Are they better than the alternative? Absolutely. Yeah. So what we've lost in 50 years was an essential understanding of how bad things would be if we were indifferent, if we just let it all slide. Mm-hmm. And we've been kind of letting it slide, but we had this federal floor, Clean Water Act, Toxic Substances Control Act. We had all these weird like bureaucrats doing all this work that we never see, except that we notice that the food isn't poisonous when we buy it at the grocery store, you know?
Right.
And the same has happened with the environment. It's not over. It's not done. We've forgotten what we value. Mm-hmm. And we assumed that somebody out there was taking care of it. Uh-huh. Even as we like sit and watch Fox News, where they do nothing but talk about the awfulness of the federal government, and you go like, well, that's awful, right? Well, we are the beneficiaries of all this stuff that we don't even know how the machine is working. And this in-stream flow thing is the same, because we had rivers that were completely dried up in the 1880s, 90s. Have you ever been down on the Ruby and look at the mining tailings that go for like 10 miles?
I haven't seen those, no.
Yeah, I mean Grasshopper Creek in the Big Hole.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful creek. It's kind of locked away on private land. That thing was, the headwaters of that thing was a mining pit. Yeah. Right after the Civil War. Okay, all of this stuff was miraculously fixed.
Yeah, right.
And we've enjoyed the heck out of it. And 34 years ago, when I started fishing like the Big Hole, I had no idea why they were grayling up by the cemetery at Wisdom, you know? and like you're catching these big browns down heading towards Wise River. And all of that was fixed by people, federal money, state money, people working to do it. And suddenly we come down to the river and go like, man, they're taking too much water for irrigation. What should we do? Well, that's the first good question. Right?
Yeah.
Because it's on us. The wiggle room created for us by the generations before us who worked with ranchers to get more water in the river, the fisheries biologists at the state of Montana. They did all this work. It'd be great if we all knew it, but we don't. Mm-hmm. But they did a lot of work. And now it's our turn. You're not just going to live on the fat anymore. The fat is run out. Mm-hmm. You gotta take a hold of you gotta get behind the mule and plow.
Yeah.
If you want this to continue, and I do want it to continue, I have spent some of the best days of my life on this earth fishing, fly fishing the rivers of Montana. And if that has to be some type of quid pro quo there, there's entire industries based on our stream access and the cleanliness and beauty and
Right.
abundance of our waters. So I don't doubt that we're going to fix this. My question is how much losses we're going to see as we move towards the inevitable realization that we have to get behind the mule and plow now.
Yeah. Was it not that long ago that the Jefferson essentially went dry?
Not that long ago, and I was on my way to a job. I still do a lot of forestry work, and was going to stop and swim in the Jefferson. This is anecdotal, right?
Sure.
But it was like, it was so low, and there was a carp going by a weed line down there, and I was like, man, I didn't even want to get in it.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is the Jefferson River.
Yeah.
Right. And granted, this is the lower Jefferson down by Three Forks. But it blew me away. And this was probably about 15 years ago. And I was like, I've talked about this with anybody who would listen. I was like, have you seen it?
Did it spur action? Did people respond to that? I mean, what I'm getting at, does it take something? Not enough. Yeah. Not
enough. What spurred things here's this thing about the federal government again. What spurred a lot of the action was in the Big Hole was the fear of the listing on the endangered species list of the grayling, because that is something that landowners would have to deal with, right? And this is the reason that there is an entire movement in the United States, and always has been since the beginning, to just get rid of the Endangered Species Act. And when you hear people arguing for that, it's because you got to admit it's because they want to do something that's wrong, that's bad for everybody.
Right.
I mean, you could talk about it in private property rights. You could talk about it in ideology. You can talk about whatever you want. But those people who are advocating to get rid of the Endangered Species Act, and they are among us every day. We listen. If you're in my business, you hear from them all the time. Well, that's why, because they had to get a solution on the Big Hole, which they haven't done really. But the wheels started rolling because they were worried about the Endangered Species Act as it applied to that watershed and the Arctic grayling. And so when people say, well, I don't think we need an Endangered Species Act, what do we need that for? Start going back and looking at the bad things that haven't happened because this one species was at risk.
Yeah.
Or the good things that happened, Altamaha River in Georgia, the restoration, private lands of longleaf pine, gopher tortoise, indigo snake, entire like systems that feed a beautiful fishery based on an indigo snake possibly being listed and then having restrictions.
Yeah.
So I don't want to go, it's all one, man. But like the fate of the grayling, the fate of the Big Hole River is the fate of all of us. Are we going to settle for the Beaverhead, the Jefferson, being a carp creek at best? I mean, is that what we want? Is that what we want to pass to our children after having had it passed to us?
Right.
As this fantastic place to go fishing and sit in the water in the hot part of summer? I mean, come on.
Yeah.
What do we really believe in here?
Is there anything we can root for right now? Is there anything in the works that, people are fighting all the time, but are we close?
You're going to have to join like Montana Trout Unlimited. The individual in our country is a very important to be an individual and have volition and agency and get up early and work hard. But you have to kind of join with like-minded people in order to change institutions that are based on you got to admit, like if you're selling alfalfa, you got a ranch.
Right.
I mean, you got to have somebody. There's got to be an incentive for you. Lots of people. There has to be a movement of people who come and talk with you. You got to have an incentive to help, because first you got to pay for the truck. You got to. I don't care if you're rich, poor, whatever.
Right.
You got to pay your daughter's tuition in college. Right. I can't afford to give up that much water right now when my income is based on this alfalfa.
Yeah.
So we have to bring, and these solutions they're out there. Trout Unlimited has been working them in the big hole for a long time. We just need to turn it up and find the new ones as we go. But there's a tendency to demonize the opposition.
Right.
But in a sense, this is like Pogo. We met the enemy and he is us. It's we and I hate to be like Kumbaya. I'm not. There has to be a stick. It can't be all carrots.
Right.
But right now, what we got is mostly carrots. And we need to figure out how to incentivize landowners to put more water in that river.
Yeah, I think that's crucial. Your point that they're paying tuition, they're paying insurance, and
cattle margins are like for a guy who's really working just cows, margins are so tight, and there's reasons for that we should address in a kind of an ecological way, which is the big four meat processors fixing the price, right? But this is a holistic thing. But once again, to the point of fixing a river, the actual thing is I can't do anything about the big four meat processors right now. I'm selling the cows at this amount of money, and this is my margin, and I need this much water to meet that margin, to make that margin. And so we have to recognize that reality and work with it.
Yeah. Hey, Hal,
we've solved bigger problems than this before. We have solved bigger problems than this before.
Yeah. And is there in one sense, and I don't want to let anyone off the hook but just like people, we're resilient, and we've proven we can turn things around. Do you worry though? I mean, is there a point of no return if people don't get on this minimum flow issue?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's not a point of no return. It's a point where it would take so much, like it's like a husky team, a sled dog team breaking free a sled. Before that sled freezes down, they can pull it.
Right.
But once it freezes down, you can't get it loose. So that's my analogy there. And I don't understand why we would be so complacent and so indifferent as to let that happen, to let the rivers die like this. It's unnecessary. The fix is intractable, but not impossible. We've done more. We restored the antelope, deer, pronghorn deer, bison in some places. We've restored the Clean Water Act. There's fish in the Cuyahoga River, steelhead. Like we have done more difficult things than this. This is microcosmic in a way. And what the sled we're pulling is probably indifference. And another one is demographics. So many people have moved to Montana in the 34 years since I've been here. And you know what baselines are, right? like what the place you moved to, you think it's always been that way.
Right.
And so we have a lot of newcomers who probably see the Bitterroot River being that low and that warm as normal. And it's so much better than where they came from. That they don't expect it to be like it was even 40 years ago. And thank the Lord they don't expect it to be like it was 130 years ago, because it was a disaster, parts of it. And so I think that one of the things we have, the newcomers, they their baseline is different, and so we
That's
have
a great point.
You have to ask them, what do you want? Why did you move here? What do you want to see? And you know what? Down deep, I think most of them would say, "Man, I want to see my kids like splash down the Bitterroot River and catch a trout."
Right.
Or I want to take my drift boat down the Beaver Head and have healthy numbers of fish. Or,
Yeah.
I think that, underneath, I spent a long time at Field and Stream. I wrote this essay called "What Do You Really Believe In?" And this was during the height of the energy development around like the Roan Plateau in Colorado and stuff. And it was really high impact. And I was like, I don't think people really want this. Like you can get the energy without doing this much damage.
Right.
And that essay actually did not catch fire. I think it was a question that people didn't really want it to be asked.
Yeah.
Because perhaps what you really believe in and what you're willing to do is different.
Uh-huh.
But we need to ask, what do you really want to believe in, and then achieve that.
Yeah.
And you can. I'm telling you, on the years of decent snowpack, we can have, and if you're a climate change, like what do they call a doomer?
Yeah.
Well, that's okay. Like, I get it. That's fine. But I'm not a doomer.
Mm-hmm.
I just want there to be more water in the river now. And then if it gets real hot and real dry in like 20 years when I'm dead, that river will be healthier for what I do now.
Right.
Let's just fix let's put the chains on the truck in the snow and not worry about summer. When we're going to have different kind of radiator fluid.
Right.
Like, let's do what's right in front of us now,
Yeah.
And this is what's in front of us now.
Yeah. Hey, earlier you were talking about getting started, sometimes trouble finishing. You said you got a project going on right now that you will finish. What is it?
So I've been engaged in it's called Journeys on America's Public Lands. And it's a history of like national forests, BLM, not the parks. And I've been engaged in that for a long time. I was in a movie. We did a movie called Public Trust. And I was already working on this project. So they chose me to kind of be the talking head in that movie because about public lands.
Yeah.
But I'm delivering. I got another year here. Research was a couple of years, a lot of travel. Got to see some incredible places from Gold Butte National Monument in Nevada to Shoshone National Forest to Tuskegee National Forest in Alabama, Apalachicola, going to Pisgah. I've still hadn't. I've been to the Pisgah a lot, but for the book, I've still got to go to the Pisgah. First National Forest in the East.
When
bought under the week.
When do you anticipate having it finished?
I think I've got about another year of writing.
Okay. And then maybe a year after that, people have it in our hands.
Hopefully, yeah. It's going to take a lot of editing. Another thing about it is I'll tend to write long, and then cut back.
Yeah.
And writing long takes longer.
Right.
And I started on a history that is, it's long.
Yeah.
But the one thing I take away from this is I do own the knowledge of all that research. And again, it's divorce from outcome, right? But I do own this knowledge, and so I've been. If people want to talk about the origins of our national forests, I'm capable of doing that now.
Okay. Great.
And it was I wouldn't say it was a passion project. I have been the beneficiary of the American public lands with my kids and my wife and my family.
Yeah.
For as long as I've been able to get out and walk.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm kind of doing the William Wilberforce thing. You can do whatever you want with your public lands, but after today, you won't be able to say you didn't know what they were.
Right. Great.
Um,
Hey, Hal, I kept you a while. I could talk for another hour or two easily, but maybe we'll do it another time. I want to, can we wrap up? I want to just ask some silly little questions. I'm going to start with one I think I know the answer to, just from what I know about you. But you could only fish or hunt the rest of your life. Which is it going to be?
Man. I don't think I can answer that.
Okay. You can't answer. Yeah.
I don't think I can answer that, but with
deny the question.
The two of them define my life.
Yeah.
I mean, hunting has been my North Star since I was 9. And most of my year is like arranged around it.
Uh-huh.
And then I was fishing. I don't know. I mean, I probably fly fish 25 days a year. Wow. That's a hard one, man.
Right.
So I wouldn't be, I doubt that I would be around if that question were put to me, like, or else they were going to dump you off the bridge.
Yeah.
I'd still be, they'd dump me off the bridge. I wouldn't be able to answer it.
Yeah. It's a Sophie's choice.
It's a Sophie's choice. So the fishing is definitely an obsession.
Uh-huh.
I definitely couldn't live without that.
Uh-huh.
So I'll choose fishing.
Okay, I thought you would choose hunting, so I was wrong.
No, I think I fish like a lot, like after work, before work. I used to say, like, I lived at Hatteras for a little while for when I was real young, and your whole life is built around fishing.
Yeah,
I worked at a fish packing house. And I would go in for 2 different shifts, and in between shifts, I just fished.
Uh-huh.
You fished for whatever was running, whatever was there all the time.
Yeah.
And so I don't think I can live without fishing, so I think I better answer that one.
Okay. I'm not going to make you do it, either one. You do them all. Keep doing them. Keep doing them.
I was getting pretty nervous.
No, yeah, right.
The whole idea of it makes me nervous.
You're starting to regret ever saying yes to this podcast, aren't you? What favorite game dish? Do you have one?
I do. I would say really that fried walleye, crappie, or yellow perch on a plate with like coleslaw.
Yeah.
And a couple of lemons.
Oh goodness.
Would probably be my all-time favorite. I live and I don't get that like I ice fish in the winter specifically with that in mind. But there's a lot of them. I mean, I love Hank Shaw's recipe for shanks for deer, mule deer, elk, or whitetail shanks, where you cut off the bone like that lower part of the leg that you used to use for grinder meat, and you cook that down in a like a Dutch oven, and it's in Hank Shaw's book, Buck Moose, which is a great best wild game cookbook for big game ever. So I'm going to take 2.
Okay, that's all right too.
I think of it as crappie, walleye, and yellow perch are the greatest freshwater eating fish.
Yeah,
to me.
Yeah,
wahoo for offshore.
Yeah, I sometimes joke with my friends. I say if walleye could wear a T-shirt, the T-shirt would say "Eat me." So they are just so good.
Well, and even more when you cut a lot of walleye, like you're filleting.
Yeah,
they're like made. They have the slab.
It is the perfect eating fish, isn't it?
It's the perfect eating fish.
It really is. All right. What is I'm going back to your book, the most famous firearm from the Old West?
Well, it's probably Chief Joseph's surrender rifle, the 1866 Winchester. And that's one of mine because they call it the Yellow Boy. And it had carried 17 rounds of 44 rimfire, which is nobody would use anymore. And he surrendered it, Chief Joseph of the Nez Perce. He surrendered that rifle to General Miles, not that far from where I live now. on the north end of the Bears Paw Mountains, almost to Canada. They almost made it.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm going to choose that one. You could go with Tom Horn's 30-30 that he used, which was I think a 92 Winchester. Yeah. But a lot of them are Winchesters or Sharps. John Brown's Sharps rifle that was made with no serial numbers because they knew John Brown was such a wild man. That's one for sure. Osawatomie Brown's Sharps rifle given to him. They called them Beecher's Bibles. From the abolitionists. Yeah. They gave out rifles to the people they knew were going to cause some big trouble. That's one.
Okay.
But yeah, there's a lot of them. That book was fun. I would have done more of those books too, except it took me a long time, and it wasn't a great money maker, but it was a lot of fun.
One of my favorite movies, I just love this movie, is Tombstone, the one with Kurt Russell in it. There's a scene there. Now I finally have an expert that I can ask if they actually used this terminology. There's a scene where Kurt Russell's confronting someone and he says, "Skin that smoke wagon, boy." Did they call them smoke wagons?
I don't know. So I don't know if that was a great a brainstorm by a Hollywood person, but they definitely had a million terms like that Beecher's Bible for the Sharps rifle that are lost. There's so much there. Like I was blessed. I worked for a wealthy guy once. And he had collected like 400 long guns and 200 and something pistols. And I was in charge of like packing this collection up and moving it. And the Native American rifles in that were all decorated with these like brass tacks that made stars. And I mean, you're holding something that was so dear to somebody. They must have had names for everything,
Yeah.
And these rifles were, so they were worn out on the foregrip from riding across the pommel of a saddle, where the friction of riding all day for years, so the smoke wagon is probably something that somebody called it. And it's funny because these people around the time of Tombstone, back through Pleasant Valley War in Arizona, Tom Horn, Wild Bill Hickok for sure, they were aware of the romance of their time, even though it didn't seem romantic at the time. They were aware of the romance of the Old West. I mean, and so they had all these terms, right? Like cowboys do. So I don't know if that was an actual word, but I guarantee that somebody used something. If you read Louis L'Amour,
right.
Yeah. But no, I've never gotten over that kind of romance. One of Wild Bill Hickok's pistols came into the Buffalo Bill Cody Center down in Cody, Wyoming, and it was a matched pair that was given to him by the count or somebody they took on a buffalo hunt. And the woman there, the historian, she gets stuff like that all the time. Like people are always like, you know what I got here, And so at first she didn't believe it, right? But she's very conscientious, so she looked at it, and it was the second Wild Bill Hickok pistol that he had sold for his burial. They had sold to bury him after he was killed at the saloon there. And so that pistol had been hung on a nail in a barn and used for killing hogs for like 75 years. I mean, it took 75 years for it to come back to the collection. It was so the history is pretty cool.
Yeah, about the romance. When I was a kid, we had a sister that lived out in Tucson, Arizona, and my mom would take us there, and we'd go to Tombstone, and but I'd pester. I want to go to this place called Old Tucson, and they would stage gunfights, and there'd be
Yep.
cowboys walking around with the guns, and there was something.
Yeah.
I mean, as a kid, I thought that was the coolest place to be.
I bet it was cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I was, I've never gotten over it.
yeah, yeah,
You know, the whole, like I still feel the same way you probably did as a little kid.
yeah. No, it was fascinating. Well, Hal, this has been wonderful. I can't tell how much I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me here, and it's been great. And I hope the next time maybe that we get a chance to talk, we're not looking at each other on a screen. Maybe we're standing next to a
Yep.
stream somewhere, and
Yep, for sure.
that would be lovely. I'd like that.
And I'll be here if you get to Montana. You're in the UP.
I'm in the UP. Yeah, yeah.
What town?
Houghton.
Houghton. I don't know.
Oh yeah, yeah. I call it the Upper Peninsula of the Upper Peninsula. It's a little, no one will be. Well, I guess if we put the video out, but if you ever see people do this for Michigan, the Lower
Yep.
Peninsula, we're up in here on this little peninsula, sixed out into middle of Lake Superior.
Wow.
Yeah,
I would love to see that.
Oh.
And what kind of fishing have you got there?
Oh, we got all kinds. It's of course, brook trout are the native fish up here, and excellent walleye fishing, lake trout. Of course, there's rainbows. There, the steelhead that I guess we could have a whole episode arguing over whether or not the Great Lakes have steelhead or not.
Right.
But they do have rainbows that run up the rivers.
Well, I thought about that when I said that about the Cuyahoga River. I was like, I'm not sure those are really steelhead.
Yeah.
But I would love to see it. I had a good friend in graduate school, Quentin Sherwood. He was a poet, and he lived in the UP. He actually was killed on his bicycle. He was a bicycle racer. But he had put the siren call of the UP. Quentin he would come fish with me here in Montana.
Yeah.
He'd say, "This is great, but you got to come with me to the Upper Peninsula."
Yeah.
And so, in Quentin's memory, someday I'm going to get up there and come see him fish.
Do it. You're welcome anytime. And it's a great place for public lands. We've got forest land and you'll still run into gates here and there. And as John Volker, one of my heroes, a UP hero, Robert Traver, he said he always considered those private property line signs. He called them suggestions.
Right. Depending on who was backing them up.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. All right.
Well, Tim, I'd love to see it sometime.
We'll do that. So thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
You bet.